Prvi panel govori o novom normalnom. Moderator i uvodničar prvog panela je profesor Ekonomskog fakulteta Univerziteta u Sarajevu, dr. Zlatko Lagundžija, a glavni govornik u prvom panelu je gospodin Gary Jacobs, predsjednik Svjetske akademije nauka i umjetnosti. Panelisti koji su danas sa nama online su gospođa Phoebe Konduri, predsjednica Evropskog udruženja ekonomista za zaštitu okoliša i resursa i profesorica na Atena Univerzitetu za ekonomiju i biznis, zatim gospodin Igor Lukšić, predsjednik vlade Crne Gore u periodu 2010. do 2012. godina i Sabina Silajdžić, profesorica Ekonomskog fakulteta u Sarajevu. Sada ću zamoliti profesora Lagundžiju i profesoricu Silajdžić da zauzmu svoja mjesta na bini, a sa nama su online glavni govornik i ostali panelisti. Profesore Lagundžija, prepuštam vam moderiranje prvog panela.
Dobar dan svima. Želim da pozdravim prije svega uvaženu kolegicu Silajdžić, a sasvim prirodno da pozdravim i naše prijatelje koje su s nama ovdje, predsjednika Svjetske akademije nauka Garya Jacobsa i Phoebe Konduri, naših prijatelja, predsjednicu Evropske udruge Environmental Economista. Inače, Phoebe je jedan od lidera zajedno sa Jeffrey Sachsom mreže samodrživog razvoja kao globalne planetarne mreže koje nadam se uskoro ćemo se pridružiti i mi. Također želim da pozdravim i Igora Lukšića, mog starog prijatelja, po više osnova. Jedino nisam bio predsjednik Košarkaškog saveza kao što je on bio u Crnoj Gori, a sve ostalo što se na Igora odnosi moglo se odnositi i na mene, tako da želim da ga pozdravim. Ja ću govoriti samo kao uvod u naš današnji panel o onome o čemu sam prošle godine ovdje govorio. Očigledno tehnika ide, što kažu, malo je zamrznuta. Nadam se da... Odlično. Prije godinu dana, 5. marta prošle godine, ovako sam počeo šta se desi naredni sat vremena dok mi imamo forum. I prošle godine u tih sat vremena sam rekao da je zagađenje koje je zarobljeno u atmosferi će biti povećano za nekih 16.000 Hirošima atomskih bombi, da će 4 miliona tona CO2 biti emitovano u vazduh, da će 15.000 hektara šume biti posječeno, 3 species u žive vrste će nestati sa lica zemlje, potrošnja energije dovoljno za 19 milijardi stanovnika planete, a sunce će emitovati na zemlju energije dovoljno za 30 godina energije koju danas trošimo. Šta se desilo također u tih sat vremena, tad to nisam znao. Taj dan dok smo mi imali forum, ovdje piše 8. marta, ne znam, to je sa stare prezentacije, inače 5. marta prošle godine smo imali forum i tada je registriran prvi korona pacijent u Bosni i Hercegovini. Tog dana za taj sat vremena je registrirano 300 zaraženih i 10 umrlih u svijetu. Mjesec i po dana kasnije, dakle godinu dana prije danas, u svijetu smo imali svakog sata registrirane novi 3.000 zaraženih i 200 umrlih. Mi to tada nismo ni primjećivali. Tada se to dešavalo nekome drugom. Šta se dešava sad, u ovih sat vremena dok mi ovo razgovaramo, šta se dešava danas u ovih sat vremena, 27. aprila ove godine? Kada je u pitanju stanje okoliša, ništa se bitno nije promijenilo. Sve ono ostaje isto. Manje više, sa nekim manjim odstupanjima, zato što je privreda, ekonomija svijeta zaribala. Ali generalno, onih 16.000 Hirošima se pojavljuje oko nas energije. U naredni sat vremena, za razliku od prošle godine, samo za godinu dana, na bazi izvještaja koji sam gledao juče, na bazi 7 proteklih dana, kad uzmete prosjek, vidjet ćete da je svakog sata u prosjeku zaraženo 35.000 ljudi širom svijeta, da je 530 ljudi širom svijeta umrlo u proteklih 7 dana. Dakle, ovo je svjetski prosjek, ali postoji svjetska superliga. Ne znam otkud mi je ovaj slajd. Ovo je, dakle, Evropska superliga koja je propala za par dana. Svi smo pričali o tome, zaboravili smo na pandemiju. Međutim, postoji svjetska superliga ili kao što su ovdje nazvali Dirty Dozens ili 12 prljavih, tako postoji svjetska superliga onome čemu mi danas pričamo. Ako formirana je neka svjetska superliga od 12 prljavi po broju mrtvih na milion stanovnika, svjetski prosjek je 400 na milion stanovnika, dakle, kumulativno do danas. Gibraltar je prvi, mala zemlja, 2791 stanovnik, Mađarska druga, Češka treća, San Marino, Bosna i Hercegovina, kumulativno peta, evo nas u Superligi, Crna Gora, Igore, čestitam, Bugarska je tu, Sjeverna Makedonija je tu, Slovačka, Belgija, Slovenija, Italija, dakle 12 zemalja planetarne Superlige, svi su iz Europe. S tim što korona očigledno nije znala šengenske vize, nije znala za naše samodrživi razvoj, granice naših mreža i evo ovo je gdje smo. Ako pogledate englesku superligu, evropsku superligu, pardon, po broju mrtvih na 100.000 stanovnika u zadnjih 14 dana, da je Sarajevo država. Sarajevo je prvo, 37,1 mrtvi na 100.000 stanovnika po broju mrtvih u zadnjih 14 dana. Mađarska je druga, Bosna i Hercegovina bez Sarajeva treća, tu je Sjeverna Makedonija, Bugarska opet, Crna Gora, Slovačka, Poljska, Češka, Zapadni Balkan, da smo jedna država, mi smo 10. u Europi po ovome u Superligi, Hrvatska, Rumunija, tu je kraj. Evo da vidimo šta je vrh svijeta, šta je planetarni vrh, evo nam planetarni vrh. Planetarni vrh, dakle bez naše volje, pošto Igore, imao sam 12, onda zbog tvoje košarkaške prošlosti sam stavio 5 prljavi top 5, kao da smo u košarci. Dakle, po broju mrtvi na milion stanovnika u posljednjih 7 dana, ako pogledate World Metrics, vidjet ćete da je to, Mađarska je šampion u zadnjih 7 dana, Urugvaj, hvala Bogu neko nije iz Europe, Bosna i Hercegovina, Sjeverna Makedonija, Bugarska. Kao što možemo da vidimo, Zapadni Balkan se odlično drži u svjetskim razmjerama. Urugvaj nam je malo upao u ovo našu top 5, ali evo tu smo gdje smo. Istina, u prethodnih 7 dana smo se popravili, dakle pali smo za 27%, što znači da idemo naprijed, vjerovatno smo proteklih 7 dana bili drugi. Mađarska nam, što kažu i pored svega, nije uspjela pobjeći. Ovih, kao i prošle godine, mi smo kao partner institut koji vodi dekan Nesa Selimović sa Svjetskim ekonomskim forumom i ove godine radili za Svjetskim ekonomskim forumom nekoliko od ovih izvještaja koje je ovdje bila i bazirao sam se, uslovno rečeno, kao uvod u našu priču gdje se nalazimo na ovim izvještaju od Sustainable Development Reporta 2020, o čemu sam siguran da će Phoebe više govoriti, European Sustainable Development 2020, zatim imamo Global Peace Index, Corruption Perception Index, indeks percepcije, dakle korupcije, Global Competitiveness Report koji radimo kao fakultet, Global Risk za ovu godinu i evo nova metrika Svjetskog ekonomskog foruma koji govori o stakeholders kapitalizmu ili novom, da tako kažem, koji nije zasnovan samo na vlasništvu šera. O tome će, siguran sam, Ismail govoriti u drugom panelu mnogo više. Kad uzmete ove kapitalne indekse, indeks Bosne i Hercegovine, Srbije, Crne Gore, evo je onaj neka naša, ajde uslovno rečeno, nazovimo ga taj širi Balkan u geografskom smislu te riječi. Ovdje možemo da vidimo da kad je u pitanju samodrživi razvoj, SDG, da je Bosna i Hercegovina 50. Global Peace Index, pazite, indeks mira, 79. Corruption 111. Global Competitiveness Index 92. Možete vidjeti da i Srbija i Crna Gora najbolje stoje po samodrživom razvoju i po miru, ali da smo tu planetarni šampioni, regionalni evropski šampioni kada je u pitanju indeks korupcije. Global Competitiveness Index je nešto malo bolji od korupcije, ali očigledno je korupcija rak rana cijele ove priče. Tu imamo i druge zemlje regiona i evo ako uzmemo samo ovu godinu da vidimo gdje smo, očigledno je da je Bosna i Hercegovina i Srbija i Crna Gora najbolje stojimo po onome o čemu će Phoebe siguran sam više govoriti, a to je ispunjavanje samodrživih razvojnih ciljeva, ne zato što je organizirano ispunjavamo, nego zato što se slažu neke druge stvari unutra. A kad je organizirana stvar u pitanju, očigledno da je korupcija rak rana i ono što je dobro reći ovdje, dobra vijest, da ne bi samo govorili loše vijesti, Global Peace Index vidi se da smo po percepciji, po indeksu mira mnogo, mnogo bolji nego što mislimo da smo kad čitamo naše medije, kad nas koje kakve budale okolo prepadaju. Dakle, očigledno kad je indeks mira u pitanju, Bosna i Hercegovina i čitav region je mnogo, mnogo mirniji nego što to izgleda iz naših medija. Povoljna poruka da vidimo koji je to 5 glavnih rizika po stepenu izvjesnosti koje smo svake godine iz godine u godinu skrećemo pažnju, da vidimo čime se svijet bavi i ovdje dolazimo na našu temu, a možete da vidite da top 5 rizika u smislu njihove izvjesnosti u ovoj godini su uglavnom od top 5, 4 su, možemo je nazvati okolišni. od ekstremnih vremenskih nepogoda, neuspjeha upravljanja klimatskim promjenama, ljudskih prouzrokovanim okolišnim katastrofama i na 5. mjesta gubitak biodiverziteta. 6. su bile prirodne katastrofe, pandemija je uskočila naprijed. Bez pandemije možemo da vidimo da je environmental issue number 1, kada je u pitanju rizik u stepenu izvjesnosti. I tu se onda pojavljaju još ove tehnološki rizici kao što je cyber kriminal, krađa identiteta i slično. Kada je u pitanju pandemijom ojačani utjecaj koji će imati najtrajniji utjecaj, ovdje je jedno izvanredno istraživanje koje smo radili zajedno sa Svjetskim ekonomskim forumom, koristili njihove podatke, a to je da istraživanje vodećih ekonomista, 24 vodećih ekonomista koji su učestvovali u istraživanju, na pitanje koji su od pobrojani i ojačani utjecaj će imati najtrajniji utjecaj na biznis, rad na daljinu je ubjedljivo na prvom mjestu, kao dugoročna stvar. Pojačane istorijske nejednakosti na drugom mjestu. Tipično jačanje tehnoloških divova, tržišno jačanje, tehnoloških divova na 3. mjestu. 4. veća uloga vlade. I na kraju, paralelni lanci nabavke i deglobalizacija. Sigurno će Fikret o tome više govoriti na njegovom panelu, o tome da se globalni lanci praktično regionaliziraju i tu može biti šansa za regione i za zemlje kao što smo mi, a sigurno sam da će profesorca Silajđić o tome nešto da kaže. Kada je u pitanju globalni rizici za poslovanje na bazi istraživanja koje je rađeno u oktobru zajedno sa Svjetskim ekonomskim forumom, možemo da vidimo da je 5 globalnih rizika za ljude koji se tiče poslovanja, da se ljudi od 13.000 biznis lidera i 130 zemalja, oni se u suštini ne bave puno okolišem. Njihov problem je nezaposlenost, širenje infekcijskih zaraza, fiskalne krize, cyber napadi i duboka društvena nestabilnost. Očigledno da ovih 5 globalnih rizika koji se tiče environmental issues je ostavljeno, biznis ostavlja nekome drugom. Da vidimo ko je taj drugi. Dakle, ključne riječi u potrazi za novim normalnim su vakcina, 3 tačke. Nekad je Lenin govorio učiti i samo učiti. Sad je vakcina i vakcina i ono učiti i samo učiti ostaje i dalje i postaje sve jače i jače. Testiranje, maska i higijena, praćenje, upravljanje, vođenje promjena, zahvaljujući digitalnoj transformaciji, koja je kapitalna stvar koja postaje kao naš ključni issue, zelena ekonomija, green economy, obrazovanje i inkluzija, brain drain je za naš region itekako bitan, fizička distanca i socijalna bliskost, ne fizička distanca, da, ali ne socijalna distanca, socijalna bliskost što je moguća veća, saradnjom protiv sukoba, da se sjetim šta nam je Jeffrey Sachs poručio prošle godine ovdje, šta je on naučio iz ekonomije, a to je da ne pozna ni jednu ekonomiju na svijetu u istoriji koja je bila uspješna ukoliko nije bila u harmoniji sa svojim susjedima. Ne znam jesam li u pravu, ali Jeffrey Sachs nam je tako rekao prošle godine. Ja sam pokušao da nađem gdje literatura ne demantuje, nisam uspio da nađem. Očigledno imamo šta naučiti. I na kraju, Sustained Development Network, zemalja, regiona kao ključne riječi, odnosno ispunjavanje samodrživih razvojnih ciljeva. Sreća, vidi se sada da ova pandemija nas je možda iznenadila, ali ispunjavanje Sustained Development Goals postaje cure ili izlječenje i za pandemiju. Evo, imamo za kraj Evropski Sustained Development Report koji smo koristili ovdje. Na ovoj slici, ne znam da li vam je nešto čudno, da li nešto ovo vam je Evropa bez granica. Na izvještaju kaže ovo je Evropski izvještaj Evropa sa zemljama partnerima. Te zemlje partneri nisu Zapadni Balkan. Kad malo uvećate ovu sliku, možete da vidite da ovih 6 zemalja kao da su prošireno Jadransko more. Nas tu nema. Sad da vidimo, Igore, ti jedini izlaziš ozbiljno na more ovdje. Mi se nešto malo brčkamo po Neumu, imamo nešto malo i gostiju, ali očigledno smo svi tretirani kao jedno veliko more. Naš razgovor o ovome treba da bude o tome kako da ne budemo samo prošireno Jadransko more, nego da budemo prošireni dio ovog kontinenta i siguran sam da ovo o čemu danas govorimo, da će biti u uvodu tako nešto. U svakom slučaju, što kažu moj omiljeni mislilac Bruce Lee, naime, kažu Bruce Lee u filmu, jednom sam upamtio da je rekao, znanje nije dovoljno, moramo ga primijeniti, htjeti nije dovoljno, moramo to uraditi. Poslije sam shvatio da je to Bruce Lee ukrao od Goethea, ali očigledno kod nas prije dođe do pameti ono što kaže neki Bruce Lee, nego Goethe. Ja ne kažem da smo imali skupina Goethea, ali u svakom slučaju valja dobaciti do svih Bruce Lee-a u ovom priči o izgradnji novog normala. Dakle, moramo vidjeti kako da se svi zajedno pokrenemo, ne bi li pokrenuli i druge. Gary, ja ti se zahvaljujem što si se iz Indije uspio da nam se pridružiš i evo ja bih te zamolio da uzmeš riječ, a onda Fibi, tebi se posebno zahvaljujem, znam kako ti je gust raspored, I zahvaljujem se zato što si pomakla neke stvari koje danas su ti također bile u planu, ali evo, bit će prilike, malo su nam ovi prethodnici, drago nam je što su probili tajming, ne mislim na dekanesu, nego mislim da uvažena gosta, tako da nadam se da ćemo biti u rasporedu. Gary, ja bih te zamolio, Gary, the floor is yours, or the screen is yours, if we can go in that direction, I would appreciate very much. Unmute yourself, unmute.
Well, I am unmuted. You can hear me now?
Yep.
Okay. It's a pleasure to be here to address this important conference. Reminds me, Zlatko, of when I last visited you for our conference in 2014 at the Parliament on the employment prospects for Bosnia. And I'm sure this will be of equally great importance. I'm going to share with you some of the work of the World Academy of Art and Science over the last 2 years, when we've been working with the United Nations office in Geneva on a project we call Global Leadership in the 21st Century. Most of us are very much preoccupied with what's going to happen next week and next month and this year during these very, very uncertain times. And usually, it's easier to predict about what's going to happen short term than what's going to happen long term. I think we're in an opposite situation right now. It's sometimes difficult to remind ourselves that just a year ago, we thought we would be out of this problem by now and going back to the new normal. Actually, what we're facing today is far more extraordinary and challenging than it was a year ago. I'm based in South India right now, and a year ago, India was one of the best performing countries in the world on COVID in terms of percentage of the population impacted. 3 months ago, the things were going up and there were 10,000 cases, new cases a day. In 90 days, it's now 300,000 cases a day. And I think that's important for us to realize when we're talking about the new normal, that we really don't know when the new normal is going to come. And it's a big mistake for us to make an assumption that it's around the corner here or somewhere else. But I think we do know very much about what the new normal will be, or rather, well, it won't be. And whenever it comes, and however quickly it comes, and however drastically, dramatically, or hesitantly it comes, we are going to a new normal and not to the old one. And it's very important in our thinking that we keep that in mind. So I'd like to mention just 5 major aspects of the new normal that are going to impact on all dimensions, all aspects of our lives globally. The first one is a redefinition of security. Already in the last 1 year, 150 million people have been directly, severely impacted by the pandemic, 3 million deaths. In terms of its economic dislocation, we're talking about something that hasn't happened in this magnitude and depth and breadth since World War II. And it has nothing to do with our traditional concept of national security. It has nothing to do with our enormous, almost $2 trillion annual military expenditure, huge armed forces, and threats back and forth. This security threat is not to nation states and borders. This security threat is to human beings. The UN last year did a survey under their UN 75 project in which they asked more than 1.5 million people about the security threats that concern them. And it won't surprise us to know that what they said the security challenges are, the security challenge is my health, is food and water, is air quality, is a job. These are the things that we're really concerned about for our security. And yet the whole global system and the whole scheme of where money is spent and where we spend our energies on security are still on a paradigm of the past. We've gotten away with it for a long time, no matter how costly it is. But this teaches us a story, a lesson. We simply cannot go beyond this way. We simply must change our thinking and paradigm about what security is. The UN's been telling us that for 25 years. They introduced a concept called human security. Human security is an integrated concept. The SDGs, with 17 SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, is a comprehensive concept of what human security should be all about. But the concept of human security goes one step beyond that. It's not just taking 17 isolated things. As the pandemic has dramatically shown us, every area of our security is linked with every other one. We've all been brought down on our knees by a microscopic virus, which you can't even see. And it's impacting every dimension and aspect of our life. We simply have to start thinking in a fresh way about what security is. And we have to think in an integrated way that takes into account all of the interdependencies between health and employment and travel and tourism and environment and all of these dimensions together. Of course, we know this is nothing compared to what's coming. The real big security threat that's around the corner or a few corners away is, of course, climate change. If we can't handle a tiny little thing called the COVID-19, how are we going to handle something that impacts the entire climate of the entire world at one time? We need new thinking. We need drastic change. And countries are waking up to that. But our thought processes and our policies and our institutional structures are far behind. We're still caught in the old paradigm. And the new normal is going to require a change in thinking, a change in policies, a change in institutional structure and operations. The second of the five is we need to reinvent multilateralism. We've been caught flat on our feet or off our feet when pandemic came, with a complete vacuum in global leadership at a time when we needed it most. And a hollowing out of our global institutions by big nation states like my own America, saying, we're going for America first. We're going back to a bilateral system at a time when we need multilateralism more than ever before. All of the surveys that are being done globally show that faith in our national government institutions is at an all-time low. The people have much greater faith in our faulty and underfunded multilateral institutions than they do in national governments. And they have twice as much faith in civil society organizations and about 4 times more in the scientific community, where confidence levels are at about 75% or more. We simply have to restore confidence in our multilateral system. We have to shift from this still competitive thinking to a really cooperative thinking in terms of what our security is and how we work together, because the COVID shows us very obviously what the climate change is going to show us even more dramatically. No country can do this for themselves. We're all dependent on one another. We need institutions that recognize that. There is a change, of course. One of the first things President Biden did was to rejoin the Paris Climate Accord in utter absolute recognition. Nobody can do this alone. We've got to be doing it together. The third is about the future of finance. We had a special study that was done and announced at our recent conference at the United Nations in December called Force for Good. It was a study of the 60 top financial institutions in the world, private sector banking and investment institutions in the world. And the first time that they have released data to anybody on how much of their investment is really going towards sustainable investments in human welfare and human security. And they have released this data because they're saying that they are committed to double it and triple it, and it is inevitable that we have to move more and more in that direction. And the reason for that, for the finance industry, is quite clear. The risks of anything else are simply too high. We have been underestimating the risks of our petroleum-based industries. We've been underestimating the risks of climate change for far too long. The figures are lying to us about what the real returns are. The only thing is we haven't paid the real cost of our previous, and the banks recognize this. They also recognize that we're seeing a democratization of finance that's going to be radically, revolutionary, changing the finance industry in the future, when more and more of it may pass out of these large mega institutions and go elsewhere. But we've seen from the time of 2008 with the quantitative easing, a complete repudiation of the traditional debt-free financial strategies that neoliberalism has been advocating for decades. We violated that 12 years ago. The only thing is we saw most of that money going in to prop up the financial institutions and the financial markets, and very little of it effectively reaching the people. And we're now seeing, and going to see much more now, targeted investment, targeted expenditure by public sector in areas that really impact the future, like our green jobs and green transition strategies. This is not just an emergency thing to handle with the COVID. This is a change in thinking and a change in policy that's going to have long-term impact and applications. And not only in the private sector, but in the public sector, we're also going to see more and more experimentation and innovation in finance, like countries are beginning, China's just beginning, with central bank direct digital currencies, directly injecting money into the markets, into the economy, rather than going through the banking system, which diverts so much of it to non-productive purposes that don't create jobs and don't have real impacts. We're going to see more and more of this work coming through currencies that are released with smart contracts that can actually pinpoint that the money being spent by the public is going for these SDGs and can be tracked through the time. The Academy has a project on this, and we're getting a great deal of interest, enthusiastic interest from central banks as well as other financial institutions, because they see it's inevitable. It will be a new normal. I'm not predicting what's going to happen in 6 months, but it's something we have to look for. The traditional way of spending money in the public through the banking system is just not adequate. The fourth area I think we're all familiar with is we've seen too many failures of the traditional economic philosophy. Neoliberalism has simply proven that it doesn't work in the world that we live in today. The rising levels of inequality, the rising levels of economic insecurity are one of the most important reasons for our declining confidence in public institutions, the social unrest, the retreat from democracy, the polarization of society, because people are afraid. And when they're afraid, they tend to go back and cling to some earlier identity rather than they've lost their confidence in the future. We're finally seeing a recognition that we've got to get rid of the petroleum subsidies, which have been propping up an industry that already is inefficient when compared with solar power. And finally, World Economic Forum has come out and said the obvious, that we can't live in a world where shareholder value is the ultimate objective. We have to shift to a stakeholder value that includes the whole society. And most important in this area is employment. Employment can no longer be held hostage to inflation rates and be considered one of the objectives unless we address the challenge of employment, which has been aggravated by the pandemic. We cannot have stable societies and stable economies and stable political systems. And of course, I'm talking in a region and at a time when the unemployment problem is very serious. We talked about it 6 years ago. There are solutions for this, but there are no solutions for it within the old paradigm. We have to be looking at new strategies. We have to be looking at new concepts of what's important, new priorities. We can create the unemployment is the most wasteful resource, waste of a resource we have. It's not money that's being wasted. 40% of the young population in Bosnia, 20% of the working force out of work. And in the US, all the studies show it costs more for a person to be unemployed than it does to pay them to work, simply for the government to pay them. The cost to society in terms of healthcare, in terms of lost skills, in terms of lost production, in terms of crime and other things, it's simply, we can't afford this anymore. Employment has to come to the top of the agenda. And of course, there is some recognition of that, but this is not just going to be a short-term injection. This is going to have to be a long-term policy. And my final quick comment will be that we're going to see a radical change in education. We're already seeing it. The conservative educational system has been resisting the movement towards online ever since it became possible about 10 years ago, because of simply the difficulties in adjusting and making a change. Now that change has been compelled on thousands of universities all over the world and on students, and even in schools down the line. We run a school here in South India, and we showed the levels of education, the quality of education can even be superior if we leverage all of the capacities that the system has. And most important, we can be availing of resources now, millions of people who have educational capacities that are not being brought into, they're in the non-formal educational, they're not in the formal system. We can be tapping a resource that's going to waste right now. And one of the things that's already beginning to happen, but it's going to happen much faster and on a larger scale, is the separation of certification of education with the actual educational delivery. We're going to be seeing more and more people getting their knowledge from different sources and going to one source simply to be certified in terms of their quality. So I've mentioned these because these are 5 fundamental paradigm shifts in security and governance, in economy and finance, and in education. And we need to be thinking in these terms when we think of what's the new future to prepare for. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. I cannot thank you more by saying, that you really gave us a great overview of where we are going to, or at least where we should be going to, and some kind of merging those two things. Without further introduction, because Phoebe, everyone, that is connected in here knows about you, I just want to thank you so much for, Phoebe is, for further reference, one of the most quoted, globally most quoted women scientists not only in her field, but Phoebe is not only scientist, which is more than evident from her CV and from internet capacities, but Phoebe is one of the major forces and right hand to Jeffrey Sachs in Sustained Development Solution Network, and really moving the things forward on a global scale. At the same time, Phoebe is co-chair of Greece Sustained Development Solution Network, SDSN network of Greece, as a country where she's most of the time spending. And Gary and Phoebe and Igor and Ismail, who will be in Jan on the next session, are among the people who we were together for last year in different events in similar setting. I really want to congratulate and thank to Gary for a remarkable Congress of World Academy of Art and Science, where Phoebe was also participating in it. And with Phoebe, I was participating in very many events under the umbrella of Nizami Ganjavi International Center. Like this event is also co-partnered with the World Academy of Art and Science and NGIC. And Phoebe, I really am eager to listen and share your thoughts with the rest of us. And I'm thanking you again for participating in here. I'm already getting a lot of messages in here and questions. I want to tell you that people are very enthusiastic about how we organize this. People are very enthusiastic and positive about technologically how we're doing this. But the most of the people who are saying that how this technologically is working, this is new hybrid event for us in this part of the world. But everyone is already saying that it's not about organizational and technical, which are not Western Balkan or European style, it's more space shuttle style. But what everyone is already saying, and this is further burden for next speakers, that the content-wise, this is going in extremely right direction, having in mind what are the people who are with us in here, and everyone is eager to listen to the rest of our speakers who are in here, but especially the one who are coming from India, because Gary is in India, I understand, not in California, where he's usually heading, and he has climate, which puts a big burden to put a tie on his, while he was with us. But Phoebe, please, would you take the floor?
Thank you so much for your kind introduction. It feels great to be in the company of such amazing people, as all of you. Gary, Igor, Zlatko, it's an honor to be here. And it is also crucial that we participate in these events, because these are the events that can accelerate the international collaboration and accelerate the identification of solutions that are relevant for a sustainable recovery from this pandemic. These are difficult times. We have the pandemic, we have the huge economic recession, we have the mother of all crises, the climate crisis. And I think this is a crucial time for UNSDSN, the United Nations Sustainable Development Solutions Network, to convey their expertise and the results of their work. The network has been launched under the auspices of the UN General Secretary in 2012, and since 2015 we produce an annual report on the achievement of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals for each and every country in the world. The Sustainable Development Solutions Network is instrumental during these days, because it can provide solutions that derive from research and innovation to the other stakeholders, like the policymakers, the politicians, the businesses, the financial institutions, the NGOs, and also the civil society, in order to promote integrated approaches to implement the Sustainable Development Goals and the Paris Agreement on climate change through education, research, policy analysis, and global cooperation. As UNSDSN, at the global level, we work on many things. We have the Lancet COVID-19 Commission that showcases pathways for a sustainable and resilient recovery. We work on research and data and statistics that has to do with sustainable development, on sustainable cities, on climate and energy, on good governance and extractive land resources, sustainable food systems, green financing, a big project on world happiness, a big project on reforming universities to achieve sustainable development, that is to become the ambassadors of multidisciplinary research that can support the implementation of the SDGs. And of course, the Blue Growth Initiative that I am leading, specifically focusing on sustainable blue growth, anything that has to do with maritime, marine protected areas, energy production from the sea, coastal interaction between rivers and seas, and so on. And of course, we have this big SDG Academy where you can find open access courses for anything that has to do with sustainable development. Lately, we've launched SDSN Europe, and I am honored to be the co-chair of SDSN Europe. So I'm not just the co-chair of SDSN Greece, but also the co-chair of SDSN Europe and participating in the Leadership Council of SDSN Black Sea, because I helped launching that SDSN. So the mission of SDSN Europe, which contains over 400 members and 13 national and regional networks, is that it aims to align the European recovery with Agenda 2030 and leveraging on the research within the networks, as well as SDSN work on the 6 transformations. SDSN Europe will play an active role in the shaping of sustainable and resilient Europe. And Europe is not just the 27 countries. Europe are the accessing countries and the countries that have a European orientation, a clear European orientation. So I'm today talking to one of these countries. As SDSN Europe, we've produced a European Sustainable Development Report that reports the progress of each and every country in the general European area with regards to implementing the 17 SDGs and the 169 targets within these SDGs. And I can tell you that Bosnia and Hercegovina is achieving good scores because it has achieved already the no poverty SDG and the partnerships SDG, and is on good pace on all the other SDGs, excluding SDG on education and blue growth that we don't have information on. We, as SDSN Europe, we also produce every year this report on the joint implementation of the SDGs and the European Green Deal. So basically what we are doing in this report, we are connecting the 4 major policies, the SDG, the European Green Deal, the European semester process, and the EU recovery plan, to support policymakers with actionable strategies that guide the EU-wide and national economic recovery in line with Europe's overreaching sustainable agenda. Last year, the report 3 main messages is that we have a responsibility to build forward better, because the pandemic recovery will be financed by national debt and will be paid by future generations. So we have a moral responsibility to the future generations. What is good news is that we have an economic case for building forward better, because recent simulations confirm that green economic stimulus, green and digital economic stimulus, is more growth enhancing than the return to normal stimulus. And we need to make sure that beyond fiscal stimulus, we will achieve a transformative public investments stimulus that will shape a sustainable, fair, green, digital transition, and at the same time leverage private sector investments. And of course, our long-run vision is the UN SDGs, the Paris Agreement, and the European Green Deal is a good example of a leadership example, the best leadership example around the world, with the right level of ambition and direction to jointly achieve the SDGs and the Paris Agreement. We all know the policy framework. We all know that the European Green Deal is a mirror of the SDGs. The SDGs have been launched in 2015. Together, a few months later, again in 2015, the Paris Climate Agreement, and in 2019 we have the European Green Deal that announces clean tech leadership for Europe, climate neutrality by 2050, reduction of pollution, and leave no one behind, an inclusive and participatory transition. And of course, in 2020, together with the short-term measures to respond to the immediate needs of the pandemic, the European Commission has constructed this recovery plan, part of the EU Next Generation, an additional 715 billion to the multi-annual financial framework of the period 2021 to 2025, and 672.5 billion of this next generation EU instrument is focused on the recovery and resilience. And the good news is that we have the focus of the Recovery and Resilience Fund aligned with the European Green Deal. So after this huge shock of the pandemic, we still remain within the spirit of the European Green Deal. The European Green Deal is our growth strategy, which says that our future is green and digital. And together with this, we have at the end of 2020, the member state leaders agreeing a 55% reduction in emissions. And on 21st of April, we have the announcement of the European Climate Law, the first legal commitment for achieving climate neutrality by 2050 and achieving 55% reduction by 2030. And we also have the announcement of the EU taxonomy, which is a classification system that identifies clearly which investments can be considered green, can be considered sustainable, and also identifies the requirements by the financial sector, but also by the business sector with regards to their ESG reporting, environmental, social, and governance reporting. So a lot is happening in Europe, but at the same time, a lot is happening at the global level. We know from a few days ago, President Biden Climate Change Summit assembled the world leaders. And if you looked into what these world leaders presented, they represented 80% of world carbon emissions, 70% of world population, and 80% of world economic output. And the summit got all these leaders, the leaders of the United States, Canada, European Union, China, Japan, Korea, India, United Kingdom, Brazil, to finally align around the goal of deep decarbonization, meaning the shift of the energy system from fossil fuels to solar, wind, hydro, geothermal, biomass, and nuclear. And of course, the reason for this is that we all know that this increase in average temperature causes billions of dollars to our economies every year, but also causes millions of human lives over the decade. So the new norm is the transition to decarbonization. We have explicit commitments like the European commitment, the China's commitment to become zero emissions by 2060, but also to draw down coal use after 2015. We even had at the summit, the climate summit of President President Bolsonaro, committing to scale up nature-based solutions in Brazil, vast Amazon forest, and in this way revealing the intention to reach net zero emissions by 2050. We even had the Russian President Vladimir Putin and the Indian Prime Minister promising climate action without offering additional details, but we all know that Russia is, of course, heavily dependent on fossil fuels, but at the same time, foreign markets for Russia's gas exports are inevitably declining. So we see a huge momentum, political momentum towards this climate neutrality, and at the same time, we see the capacity to make the transition due to achievement of low-cost renewable energy production and at the same time, circular economy solutions that can reduce the cost of production, and at the same time, huge potential by nature-based solutions. So I will close this first intervention by referring to our results as Lancet Commission for COVID-19. I am honored to lead the task force on transforming recovery into a green future. The whole commission is led by Jeff Sachs, which is the obvious leader on sustainability on the global scale. And our basic results, basic recommendations are the following. Recovery packages across the world should finance the transformations needed for green, digital, and fair future. Recent commitments to achieve net zero greenhouse gas emissions by around mid-century, by Europe, by China, by the US, by UK, and all the countries I mentioned before can provide the needed momentum for deep transformations. 1/3 of global assets under management at the moment are environmental, social, and governance based, and the more profitable funds, the more successful funds are the more sustainable funds. So the recovery should build on this financial momentum as well. We know that at the moment, the financial resources devoted to and commitments made for post-COVID-19 recovery are insufficient for a green recovery. But my hope and my understanding of the situation is that during the span of the pandemic, we invested in short-run quick fixes to support the vulnerable in our economies and society. Now it's the time where the resources from the different recovery funds and infrastructural plans that are placed on the political scene will start to be absorbed. So this is the year where we will finally know if this recovery is going to start in the right direction, that is the sustainable direction, the direction which commits to financial stability, economic efficiency, environmental resilience, and social cohesion. Low-income countries and emerging markets urgently need our support. And thankfully, the International Monetary Fund and the World Fund got the major economies, including the US, the European Union, China, and other G20 countries, and they have signaled a few weeks ago their support for new allocation of $650 billion worth of IMF's reserve asset special drawing rights to ensure that the governments in low-income and middle-income countries have the means to combat the COVID-19 pandemic and start on a path of investment-led recovery. I am also part of the Wealth Academy. Lately, I became a fellow thanks to Gary and other members. And I'm saying that is just to say that I also support this big project on financing the SDG. And at the same time, I want to announce that the focus of the second statement of the Green Recovery Task Force of the Lancet Commission, together with the focus of the new report of SDSN Europe, will be green financing, the new taxonomy for financing and how we can mobilize and accelerate the transition to sustainability. Closing, with leadership and creativity, this global financial cooperation can help us end the pandemic. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you, Phoebe. Thank you very much. And of course, I think, Igor, this is excellent introduction for what you're planning to say with no further notice. Igor, the screen is yours. We are on the floor. I cannot tell you the floor is yours. Next speaker, Sabina, I will tell her the floor is yours. But we all share the same screen and in attempt to be more socially close. So the screen is yours, Igor.
Thank you. Thank you, Zlatko, so very much for this kind invitation to join today's conference and speak on this panel along with the Professor Jacobs and Professor Kunduri and Professor Lajic, and you, of course, which has been great pleasure. I think the whole topic is incredibly inspirative and motivating to all of us who either work in the theoretical or as practitioners. We are all in the search for new normal. But it's also worth saying that this is not going to be the first time we are in the search for new normal. And probably we should draw some lessons from the past, despite the fact that every new normal has its specific aspects. But I mean, new normal was also after the Second World War, with the whole set of institutions, with the whole new set of interrelationships and with the nuclear technology probably shaping a lot of the world in the second half of the 20th century. New normal was also the fall of the Berlin Wall, and we all had to adapt to the new reality. And to a great extent, the new normal was also post September 11, the world after September 11. So we are all in the search of the new normal, and obviously, already for some time, I should say. I think COVID-19 is actually only a great acceleration for all of us to think towards reaching this new normal, because in my view, it's been already in shape for already some time. And I think Green Agenda, or prior to European Green Agenda and Green Deal, because by the way, it was revealed in December 2019, so a few months before the pandemic. So nobody knew back then that COVID-19 would cause such a major disruption. It also started with SDG agenda. Actually 10 years ago, when Rio Summit tasked the special task force to come up with sustainable development goals, and it was great to also be part, along with you, Zlatko, and many other people, in 2015 General Assembly meeting, when the SDGs were adopted as a truly global agenda. And for the first time ever, it was a bottom-up approach, which took into account different aspects, different interests, different ideas, and so on and so on, to forge this new development agenda. But in this search for the new normal, I think it's also worth thinking about, or actually discussing what actually it is about. Is it about the new way of thinking, or is it about new way of doing things? I actually believe that this is really about the new way of thinking. It's about vision. It's about thinking out of the box. It's not about doing things in a new way, because then technology solves problems. This is really about new vision and about the new way of thinking. What is it that COVID-19 has brought to us? Probably it has only brought to light in a very clear way some of the challenges, dilemmas that we globally have been facing for already some time. We can talk about consequences in terms of politics, in terms of economic development, social patterns. Even before COVID-19, we were able to see the rise of the multipolar world and different visions, different ways how it should be organized, how the new world challenges should be approached. And growingly, we've seen the debate between those who are, for more global and open world, versus those who are for more closed, national borders. So today we also have very, fierce discussions, very hot debates about whether new politics is about new nationalism or new globalism. And some of the upcoming European election will be actually about that. That's very important. Secondly, in terms of the economic development, we have growingly seen more regional arrangements, more regional frameworks, even more nationalism in terms of more economic nationalism as a new effect, or let's say a revived phenomenon. I cannot say it's a new phenomenon, it's a revived phenomenon to what has been the characteristic of the past 20 or 30 years of increasingly globalized economy, increasingly globalized trade. So COVID-19 has actually brought back this discussion of whether trade arrangements or trade dealings or whether national production systems should be more independent, less internationalized, less dependent on international trade, which is very important new input for in discussion. And also, socially speaking, COVID-19 has brought us, among other things, the hybrid way of doing conferences. This is something which is new to us, or relatively new to us. I mean, part of you being on site and a lot of us being off site, but joining in through various social networking mechanisms. So is it about disruption in communication we're talking about? So all these conferences are beautiful and very important, but are people able to associate and exchange and cooperate without really being able to talk to each other in person? To do a handshake, to some who are intimate and close enough to hug and so on. Are we able to go beyond topics like this or discuss topics like this, only relying upon new hybrid way of communication? So these are all very important aspects to any discussion when it comes to the search of new normal. I think that, and I fully agree with what Professor Jacobs and Professor Kounduri also talked about, that the new normal or the new world facing a lot of challenges has to be green, has to be digital, has to be kind of new and fresh. So this is about put this new vision and out-of-box thinking putting forward. So many challenges we are facing, which are related to resilience, which are related to sustainable value chains, which are related to paperless administration. These are all things that we discuss about. Some more inherent to certain parts of the world, probably less inherent to some other parts of the world. But it is important to figure out ways not to cut communication, not to cut international trade flows, not to stop, in my view, working together to turn every crisis into an opportunity, rather than closing ourselves. And these are many challenges that different countries face. We in the Western Balkans obviously share many of these challenges. You mentioned in one of your slides, Zlatko, in your great, very inspirational opening remarks, where, for example, Western Balkan 6 stand with regards to some measures. But you remember when we started it 6-7 years ago, it was not really a new normal. It was very abnormal. We were talking about Western Balkans 6, and now growingly we realize that actually regional cooperation can be brought to the next level when Green Agenda, Western Balkans Green Agenda, with the many of great initiatives which are inside, are taken together, and countries in the region can cooperate greatly to make some of those great initiatives a reality. So a lot of us in this part of the world are also faced with something which is called middle income trap. So whether our further growth and development is stuck, or are we able to figure out the ways forward? And the only way forward when it comes to emerging out of emerging out of this trap or going around the trap is through innovation. Are we innovative enough? Are we thinking in an innovative way enough? If to pursue and push for a green economy, the decarbonization is obviously not only a growing reality, but a great opportunity for us to be different from others. We need to make sure that we are inclusive enough. We need to make sure that we swerve away from classic way of financing into something which is more innovative, so-called SDG financing, and growingly it is stock exchange, it is capital markets that can bring the new opportunities in that way. So I need to I'll stop here. Obviously, mindful of time and in interest of time, I should stop here. There are a lot of topics to discuss. It's a greatly this debate is very inspirational, and I think we can go on like this for many hours. But my major point is that I believe that this new normal is about new way of thinking. It's about what we do to put that vision into practice through a new out-of-box thinking, because we are growingly live in an uncertain reality, and everybody in a way. It's very interesting because talking about pandemic and the impact of pandemic, talking about COVID-19, it's kind of everybody was waiting for that to happen, but nobody expected it to happen. So this probably tells also a lot about what kind of the reality we're living in, and human societies can only find a way around it if we cooperate enough, if we associate enough. Thank you.
Thank you. Hvala, Igore. Evo, ja sam napravio grešku, s tobom sam se dogovorio da pričamo na našem jeziku, ali pošto sam te ja najavio na engleskom, da ste vjerojatno na automatskom pilotu nastavio pričati na engleskom, jer u zadnjih godinu dana na različitim skupovima slične vrste smo razgovarali i jednom nismo imali priliku da pričamo na našem jeziku, nego smo uvijek pričali na engleskom. Evo i sam
to je tačno, ali ako bude pitanja možemo...
Eto, dakle, evo sad ljudi da znate, mada je on već odgovorio na masu pitanja kao i Fibi, koje sam mislio da im postavim, pa su zato duže govorili. Tako da evo vidjeli smo, Igor zna naš jezik i to smo provjerili, dakle sve ide kako treba. Mi smo prije 7 godina, kad smo na marginama Skupštine Ujedinjenih nacija prvi put organizirali sastanak lidera Zapadnog Balkana u to doba, u priprema za taj sastanak svi smo se dogovorili da se usaglasimo, da moramo svima da objasnimo da ne pravimo Jugoslaviju. Tako da mi kad smo pričali o Zapadnom Balkanu, nama je glavni problem bio da objasnimo medijima i uopšte nismo im uspjeli reći šta hoćemo da uradimo. Mi smo ispričali upravo što se sad dešava, ali to nikog nije interesovalo. Svi je interesovalo da to i Boga vam pravite Jugoslaviju. Dakle, eto, hvala Bogu, sad više nismo tu, ne pita nas niko to, ali daj da nešto napravimo. U svakom slučaju, kolega Lukšiću, tebi hvala puno. Fibi je već odgovorila na pitanja koja sam je postavio u svom uvodnom izlaganju, tako da je bila malo duža. Gary, you will get the questions after we finish with the first round with Professor Silajic. So thank you so much for being so patient. And by the way, you planned anyway to stay all the way with us. So, I mean, since you are in India now, I mean, you have good time frame. You don't have to wake up like Ismail is now jogging probably to join us at 7 o'clock in the morning because he's in Washington, not in Cairo this time. So, Madam Silajic, ja se izvinjam, evo, profesor Silajic, evo ja vama, što kažu, dajem uputstvo da pričate na našem jeziku, da vidi Igor da i mi znamo ovdje između sebe pričati na našem jeziku.
Ja sam baš planirala na engleskom.
Šalim se, kako? Izvolite.
Dobro, evo ću imamo prezentaciju, jel?
Imamo prezentaciju.
Poslana je, ja vjerujem da je neko...
Znajući kako ova tehnika radi, bojim se da...
Dobro.
Gdje je prezentacija? Ide, jel? Evo, izvolite.
Ja vas mogu zamoliti samo da ovo ne bih ja oborila.
Dajte mi taj mikrofon.
Hvala.
Hvala. Sve smo.
Dobar dan. Warm greetings to all. I'm really grateful for the discussions and the earlier remarks made by distinguished guests of our forum. I'm pleased and truly delighted to have the opportunity to address some of the important issues that are related to the concept of sustainable development that has been mentioned so many times, our panelists, and basically to address some of the important issues that have to do with the environmental challenges, but from the perspective of transition economies, or in the very specific context of less advanced transition economies. Well, today my ambition basically is to deliver key findings of the 4 distinctive but complementary research. Complementary research that deal with the environmental challenges. I'll be talking about this transition to green industry from the industry firm level perspective and in the very specific context of the less advanced transition economies. Well, motivation for today's speech is basically my ambition to contribute to the policy debate by bringing some valuable insights stemming from empirical research. And the research that is related to the determinants of CO2 emissions, environmental policy effectiveness, and implication of various policy efforts to reduce CO2 emissions, but in a very specific context of transition economies. So the discussions and policy recommendations that follow refer to this very specific context of less advanced Western Balkan countries, I would say, that might also include other less advanced transition economies. So if we move, I would like to synthesize some of distinctive research questions and distinctive but very complementary research objectives. So in this very context of better understanding of environmental challenges and the challenge of transforming our industries and complying with this, our green vision, we've conducted several research, and one of the ambition was to first ask what is the impact of renewables, like energy produced from renewable sources, on CO2 emissions, again in the specific context of the transition countries. We then investigated how effective is tax policy, i.e. environmental taxes, and with very special reference to taxing CO2 emissions, in basically modifying the behavior of economic agents, and finally curbing CO2 emissions, again in the very specific context of transition economies. Well, obviously there is a trade-off, there is a policy trade-off, or we often ought to think about the policy trade-offs when talking about the environmental objectives and economic objectives. As the vision implies a convergence between economic and environmental agendas or specific visions. Is this controversial? That, well, there is a debate going on, and it seems to be going on forever. So that we further investigating, well, environmental taxes seem to be effective in curbing CO2 emissions, but what is the impact of environmental taxes on the firm level competitiveness of industry competitiveness? And this is the next research that has been followed. And then finally, we ought to be knowing a bit more. We ought to comprehend the aspect of this green transition from the company level perspective. So there is a work in progress. The ongoing research is very ambitious, is very comprehensive, and we are investigating the different aspects of energy transformation on the company level. So first we ask, what is the impact of environmental management practices on firm level competitiveness? We want to understand what are the sources of this transition or introduction and improvement of environmental practices at the firm level, company level, but we would also we are also very keen in comprehending a better understanding of barriers to this complex transition. So to sum up, a lot of the number, empirical results are rather wide-ranging, but some of the key findings that I want to refer to is the econometric research, or the results of these various econometric research, supports the hypothesis that the energy produced from the renewable sources significantly reduce CO2 emissions. Well, this clearly implies that the relevance of the importance of energy transition and investments in green transformation of energy. Then further, we found that environmental taxes have been, successful and significantly reduce CO2 emissions, even in the very specific context of transition economies. These taxes do affect patterns of behavior, but we also found that they adversely affect companies' performance. So there's huge policy implications that are related to the distinctive environmental regulation and the need for environmental regulation compliance across countries, because less stringent economies tend to specialize in expert performance of very pollutant industries. So some good news come out from the firm level analysis, and particularly qualitative analysis, apart from the quantitative and econometric result, that the environmental management performance, it does help and does contribute to the increases in export performance in the very specific context of the BH economy and pollution-intensive economy. So overall, if we are to draw some important policy conclusions that are synthesized and contextualized from these, various distinctive but complementary research, then I would say that although environmental taxes seem effective in modifying companies' behavior, then a transition to the green industry requires an integrated policy approach. Many of you have talked about this aspect of this integrated approach, and also about the importance of international collaboration. We strongly believe and argue that multilateral and bilateral development assistance should be used extensively to promote technological collaboration of companies, allowing for transfer of cleaner technologies. So we have a strong empirical evidence that basically shows that this transition to green industries is very complex, and it requires support, and we need an integrated support, and we need multilateral and bilateral assistance in achieving our goals of green industry in very specific context of Western Balkan countries. So thank you very much. I would stop here, and welcome. All comments are more than welcome.
Thank you, Professor Silajic. Thank you very much. We have to wrap up this because most of the questions were already answered. But Gary, I would just pass the one question for you that also refers to what Phoebe was talking about in your previous intervention. Phoebe also pointed out this latest summit that was organized by President Biden, in which he put together 40 people, 40 global leaders, and it was very encouraging for everyone that we had 40 global leaders who are covering over 85% of the world economic output, and who are basically speaking also producing more than 83% of world carbon emission. And he put together 40 out of them, but 153 were missing. And 153 that were missing, they will have to come in COP26 in Glasgow in November this year to annual UN meeting, where they will be also together with those 40 world leaders. Those 40 world leaders showed, regardless of all disputes on triangle in between Russia, China, USA, they show that they can replace the potential Cold Wars and Cold Wars with cooperation, and cooperation in a common world war against climate change. So my question for you is, because obviously, and we heard, and Phoebe was talking about European 55% goal by 2030 to decline emission. Biden said by 2030 it will be 50%. President Xi also went in that direction. They're all aiming by 2050 to get to zero, and basically speaking, save the planet for future generations. So my question for you is, if you would be advisor of one of 153 missing presidents on that summit, and they will come in November in Glasgow, and in Glasgow they will have to show that they got it, that they have a plan. What would you suggest to one of those 153 missing presidents who will have to come to Glasgow and show and also give commitments, because there will be a lot of first political and then financial ways to press them in that direction. Whoever does not get prepared in time, that country is going to be loser. So the question is, what would be your suggestion as advisor to missing president, not the missing one in here, but the missing one on that meeting in 40 leaders? What to do in next 6 months? Actually, would they appeal to their financial community, to the business IT community, to whom, and what to do in that respect?
Question, Zlatko, and thank you for directing it. A difficult question to answer in the generality because we don't know the country or the details. But I think the most important thing I would say is that what happened in the meeting that President Biden convened was to make a very strong statement. Most important was the political statement that America is back in the ring and committed. And it's going to, whereas things got thrown into a loop when we pulled out of the climate accord, and you can be sure that America is going to come back quite aggressively in creating expectations for other countries that were left vague up until now and going to be pressing for more. And I think that the most important thing I would say is take this very seriously, not just take it seriously as a compulsion, but take it seriously as an opportunity, depending on which country we're talking about. I mean, what was one of the first things that happened after President Biden was elected, shocked the whole world, including Detroit, was General Mills announcing that they're pulling out of the petroleum-based automobiles they've been producing since 1920, that they have a phased program to get out. They're really going to renewable energy sources. That's the kind of commitment we're going to be seeing more and more. So my main advice would be, look at this as an opportunity and how you cannot meet the minimum requirements to qualify or stay in the loop, but how can you become a leader? And where are the opportunities out of that for your country? And there are many countries that are looking at those opportunities, as China has been doing so well in the solar field or in the automotive field and so forth. We have to look at it proactively and see, where does this give us a strategic advantage if we're one of the leaders rather than those who are falling behind? Other things are going to depend on the country and the problems they have, the contributions they have, the kind of industry and agriculture and other things. But I think take it seriously. Doesn't matter only or essentially anymore what's going to happen in the US. This is going forward aggressively, and the world is going to commit itself to meet those goals. And that recognition that it's not an option, but that is an opportunity. I think we have to look in each specific case for each country, where can we turn this challenge into the opportunity, which is what you started with, or what Ambassador Sadler started with this morning. And
I want to, just because I see Ismail, our dear friend Ismail Serageldin, he's punctual as always. I mean, 1 o'clock sharp, 7 o'clock in Washington. Ismail, greetings. And Professor Čaušević is going to, let's say, be sitting in this chair very soon, because we will be going to be wrapping up in order to hear our next panelists, because basically speaking, our speakers already answered the questions that were prepared for them in different forums, and it looks like all great minds are thinking alike. So, I mean, obviously they were prepared to say what I was planning to ask them. So that's the reason why we can wrap up this in order to get on time. As Igor was saying, we have lessons learned, and we have a lot of things that we can learn from our past, and we have to think out of the box. Speaking about learning from our past, we are maybe in Western Balkan, maybe not best example of someone who is learning. from our past and getting lessons on time, but maybe this time we will be, let's say, helped by others, our friends, also to learn something. As you rightly said, back in the 14th century, Black Plague was there, and at that time, Black Plague actually eliminated almost 1/4 of population of the planet. There was at that time 500 million of people on this planet. So Black Plague was sorted out with washing hands and lockdowns, basically speaking, with no vaccines. Then we had Spanish flu back in 1918 to 1920 that took more lives than World War I. Spanish flu actually scaled down the global population from 1.5 billion for almost 100 million people. Just to make you a comparison, which is today we have 5 more people on the planet, and I won't say only, but 3 million people are dead so far. And Spanish flu took away 30 times more people. The difference is we have internet, we are connected, we know what's happening, and we have science that is scaling down the things. So in that context, I think, as we heard from previous speakers, 3 key priorities can be seen as saving lives and prevention of actually pandemic, protecting vulnerables and people through the actually saving their jobs and the companies. But as someone said, not going back to the normal, but that's why this is new normal. And of course, the third priority is development of more resilient surroundings and recovery. And in that context, we have 3 parallel strategies, which is easy to say in my language, 3 paralelne strategije. Dakle, 3 paralelne strategije. Prvo je olakšavanje i odbrana, ili ono što bi se reklo relief and resilience, izabrani zdravstveni i ekonomskih prioriteta, ali uz paralelno projektovanje dugoročnih ciljeva. Thinking out of the box i razmišljanje na način koji je kolegica Silajđić već ovdje vrlo precizno govorila. Druga strategija je oporavak i restrukturiranje i restartanje, odnosno restoring, restructuring and restarting u 4 paralelne ravne, koliko smo ovdje čuli. Ja sam vidio restrukturiranje ugroženog zdravstvenog sistema, oporavak ljudskog kapitala, restrukturiranje firmi i rješavanje zaduženosti i reforma politika i institucija. I treća strategija, obnova, rekreiranje i inoviranje, inovativnost, o čemu su mnogi govorili, ili recover, recreate and reimagining zdravstvenog sistema koji je bio spreman za poslovanje, obrazovnog i naučno-istraživačkog sistema koji je bio ojačan i prilagođen novim izazovima i sistemski rad na nejednakosti, o čemu je Gary naročito govorio, pravednosti i inkluzije i fokusiranje na zelenu ekonomiju i digitalnu transformaciju ukupnog ekosistema. Ovo je samo su neki elementi onoga što smo čuli, što sam ovdje sebi notirao. Ja vam se zahvaljujem. I'm thanking to all of you, and I was told that we can break the schedule 15 minutes because our president actually took 10 more minutes, but with presidents you never argue and when you have nice manners. And we do in academic community, so I mean, we will stop in here. And Fikrete, I don't know how it goes with scenario. Leila, are you going to walk up to the stage and call our next panelists? In this panel, as you saw, you have 2 of us in here, and 3 of us were someplace in a cloud. We had 3 speakers in a cloud. Now we are flipping. We have 2 cloud speakers. Ismail, you're the first one, and I really thank you for being with us, and together with Jan. And we have 3 on site. I don't know what is the script. Leila, you're jumping on the floor. Or I'm sitting here and calling Fikret, or what?